This is video 4 for chapter 1 in anatomy and physiology. And in this video, we're going to look at one of the categories of feedback cycles. And we're going to look at it through the use of an example in this diagram. So the example that we're going to use is blood pressure. So blood pressure is important in our bodies because blood actually takes nutrients like oxygen and fuel to the cells of our body and gets rid of waste. And if we don't maintain blood pressure, we could end up getting very ill and possibly dying. So it is monitored very closely, and our body can do things to help maintain a constant blood pressure. So for our example, we're going to have some kind of stimulus. So some kind of event that changes our blood pressure. So let's say that we get really mad. This is our stimulus. And sometimes these can be psychological, like mad, or something physiological that happens with our body. Maybe we ingest something, or we have a very large cut and our blood pressure cannot be maintained. But for this case, we get really upset at something. Well, that causes the blood pressure to go up. So the blood pressure, or BP, increases. So that's the result of the stimulus. Well, we have little receptors in blood vessels, and they're called baroreceptors. Baro means gravity or pressure. So we have receptors that monitor our blood pressure, and they are going to send a nerve impulse. So there's our input to the brain. And the brain interprets the input. Well, the brain then sends a nerve impulse, which would be our output. It sends this nerve impulse to the heart, which is an effector. And the heart rate decreases slightly. So the heart generates the blood pressure. So the pumping of the blood into the blood vessels and the actual smooth muscle that's contained in the arteries helps maintain that blood pressure. So by changing the heart rate, we can change the blood pressure a little bit, and we can slow the heart down just a little bit, or even its pumping squeezability can change. And that will, in fact, cause the blood pressure to go down to the normal range. There are a lot of other things that are in play, but this is just looking at one particular example. Now, if the blood pressure does not go down enough, this whole thing can repeat itself until it does go down. This is an example of negative feedback. So if we go back to the types of feedback systems on the previous page, you can see that we have a negative feedback system. This reverses a change in the control condition. This is the more common of the two types of feedback systems. So negative reverses a change in the control condition. So going back to our diagram, we're going to look at a positive feedback system. And this one deals with labor contractions. So when a baby's being born and the uterus contracts to expel the baby. So the stimulus for this controlled condition is the baby's head pushes on the cervix, which is the opening to the uterus. So as the head is pushing on the cervix stretches slightly. And located in the cervix are receptors that are actually going to detect this stretch. So we have stretch receptors. If it triggers it enough, it sends input in the form of a nerve impulse to the brain, our control center. And it interprets the results. And through a system of nerve impulses going down into the pituitary gland, we secrete a hormone called oxytocin. And this hormone is going to travel in the blood all through the body, but it affects the uterus. So the effector is the uterus. And what it does is it increases the contractions. So it squeezes the uterus even more, and that causes the cervix to dilate, or the opening gets bigger. Well, that increases the cervix opening, which means it stretches. Well, if it stretches, this goes back up here, and it causes this whole thing to happen even more. So this is an example of a positive feedback cycle. So the effect of what's going on causes this to amplify. And what is going to stop it? Well, once the baby is gone, we have the cervix actually going back to its normal size after the placenta is delivered, and that will cause the hormone not to be released. So this one amplifies the condition. There are some problems with this one. So if we go back to our notes and look at positive, this reinforces a change in the control condition. Not very common, because this can go out of control. Another way it can go out of control is if you are bleeding heavily, you're losing blood volume, your body can detect that, and in order to increase blood volume getting to different areas, it increases heart rate, which can cause you to bleed even more, and the whole thing can basically drain your body of blood, and you go into shock and die. So it can have some bad effects, but for the most part, it is there to help you, but we could have some issues with that.